Good afternoon. Good afternoon. From Mexico. My guest today, the 14th of June, is Caleb Caudell, or Caudell. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. His bio admirably brief. It says, "My name is Caleb. I read, write, ride my bicycle, and spend time with family and cats." Caleb is from the American Midwest and has written what I think might be one of the quintessential novels of the American Midwest, of the modern American Midwest at least. We'll get into that shortly. He also writes short stories which appear on his blog. Hi Caleb, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
All good here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
From the American Midwest, you're in Indiana, I understand?
That is right, yeah, from Indianapolis.
Indianapolis. Would you care to give us a bit of your background, where you started out, how you got to Indiana, any jobs or relevant information that we might be interested to hear?
Sure, yes. I am from a small town in southern Indiana called Bedford, which is a little bit south of Bloomington, which is a little bit more popularly known as a college town. I spent most of my adolescence then in Bloomington, and I went to school at IU, Indiana University. My deeper background, really one of my biggest interests as a kid and then a teenager was music. And I got into guitar and spent pretty much all of my time after school practicing guitar, very obsessively, running scales, learning songs, writing my own songs, playing in bands. I went to IU for 1 year as a classical guitar performance major. I dropped out, played in bands for a while, spent most of my 20s. I don't want to do too much of a disservice to myself, but you could say that I was bumming around quite a bit. Did some drugs, had some fun, but lived fairly aimlessly for a while. And then in my late 20s, I don't know, I was 27, 28. I was in a relationship with a young lady who got an opportunity to work at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. I moved out with her, and when we got out there, of course, we didn't really know anyone. We were isolated. And in that state of isolation, I committed myself to writing every day. Up until that point, I had had an interest in reading. I was a pretty consistent reader, and I ended up getting a degree in comparative literature when I went back to school in my mid-20s. But I didn't really write that much. I wrote papers. I did the academic thing for a little bit, even considered grad school. I'm glad I didn't do that. But out in DC, I had the time, and I was compelled by a sense of loneliness to put my thoughts to the page, and that became a regular thing. And that was an extremely valuable experience and a valuable habit to instill. And initially, for the first 2 or 3 years of my writing habit, I was writing exclusively nonfiction or memoirish essays. And then about 3-ish years ago, I tried my hand at fiction. And from there, I started to think that maybe I could put together something more substantial. At first, I had my sights merely set on short stories. It was an attention span thing and also a limited ambition thing. I didn't want to give myself too big of a project too early, and I started to feel pretty comfortable doing the short stories, but I guess it didn't take that long. It was about a year or so into that I came up with the idea for a novel, actually a couple of novel ideas, but the one that I have out now, that's the one I started working on first. And once I started doing that, I just worked at it every day. It was something that grew pretty quickly, and I was able to stay consistent with it.
It's an extremely accomplished novel. We'll come to that in a minute. And it shows a remarkable mature talent, I think. So from DC, how did you get back to Indiana then? Was it circuitous or you just
I didn't. I was not forced to flee. There were no extreme circumstances. No, I was there a little over 2 years. My relationship that I was in at the time ended about halfway through, and she ended up leaving before I did, and I hung around for another year by myself, and that was an interesting experience. I learned a lot. I'm fairly provincial, I think, by nature. I like where I'm from. I like I like my family. I'm not. I am alienated to the extent that a modern individual is alienated, but I don't feel alienated in the sense that I need to live in Brooklyn. I need to be in San Francisco. I like where I'm from, and for the most part, I assumed that I would always live in the area, and living in DC was very different. I'm glad I did it for the time that I did. But after about 2.5 years being out there by myself, I had made friends. It's not as though I stayed completely isolated, but it was enough. And the cost of living was so high there as well. It was very stressful. And I'd made a pretty simple decision that it was time to head home and reunite with friends and family, and even the woman who I had split with at the time. We got back together for a little bit, and it was a good move.
Well, it can't have hurt your research for the novel, because DC is literally a world away from the Midwest, and it's also largely holds the strings that make things work in the Midwest. So you've been the den of iniquity and seen where all the trouble starts, I suppose.
That's right. I have been in Satan's lair.
Did you work during any of this time, earn a living, or you've always coasted somehow?
No, I have always worked. I've always worked in what is broadly referred to as the service industry. So either in the back of the house, in kitchens, on the line, on a grill, as a prep cook, or in the front of the house as a cashier or a barista, something of that nature. Pretty much always some job like that.
Shift work like that obviously gives you a chance to write as well, rather than regular 9 to 5, probably a better chance to write anyway.
In some ways, yes. 9 to 5, I have never really worked a true 9 to 5 job, Monday through Friday. I've pretty much always worked weekends. I've always worked strange hours, either very early in the morning or very late at night, and yeah, usually weekends. So on that subject of alienation, there always has been a certain disconnect I've felt from most people, or many people that I encounter who do work those more regular hours, those regular jobs, the office jobs, the kind of people that I typically end up serving, providing food for, or ringing up. And not only do the hours allow me to write, but the perspective or the point of view, I think, gives me a ton of raw material. A lot to observe of human nature. You're seeing a lot of people coming and going very rapidly, and you're getting a glimpse of humanity that people who don't do that kind of work just have no idea of.
It's a very good point, and it comes across in the book, actually. Now you mention it, you're getting a snapshot with no context, no background story, no history or anything, and it's seconds, but it can last a lifetime with those seconds. And yes, if you're in a regular 9 to 5 job working in a warehouse or something, none of this would ever happen. So
things would never occur to you. Yeah, and I have trouble relating or understanding what it's like to go somewhere where you sit and you see the same 5, 7, 10 people day in and out,
who have largely been filtered by the HR department and by their degrees and whatever it is it's doing. So you're getting a bubble effect.
Oh, absolutely.
All right, and how do you consider yourself red-pilled? the novel, I would say, addresses a lot of the issues, a lot of the things that have gone wrong in the modern world, brutally and without any hesitation on your part. But you stand a little bit back from prescribing solutions or whatever. Where do you stand in that respect?
Yeah, in the novel, in a work of art, what I want to do as an artist, for the most part, is to describe and not prescribe. But with that being said, I broadly red pilled, although more crypto. I will tell you, here I am speaking under my own name, but in my day-to-day life, in my personal life, in my dealings with people in general, I am very easygoing. I do not look for conflict. I do not look for opportunities to insert my potentially disruptive or abrasive views. I don't really care for conflict interpersonally. There's a danger in that when taken to an extreme of being overly passive or getting walked on and not ever asserting yourself. I don't think I quite have that failing, but in general, I like to keep things cool. But as far as what I read, what I privately consume on the internet, how my thoughts run, sure, I'm sympathetic.
Very good way of putting it. And it's true. It's a position most of us get to eventually, I think, because really there's no profit in conflict with our particular enemy. They're not going to change their mind. It is in their DNA, hardwired, and all you're going to do is make enemies and lose ground personally. And
yeah, you have to pick your battles. You have to be smart on your feet. You have to know where you are, and you have to know there are certain people with whom you can disagree safely and you can have a reasonable conversation even where views differ, but you just need the social savvy to know when that's possible and when it isn't.
Yep. And was the political angle, or let's call it red pill, or this attitude you have to life and so on, was that instrumental in the writing process? Was it a feeling I have to get in my daily life? I can't necessarily express myself, but maybe through literature there's an opportunity.
Well, two things come to mind. One is that initially when I started writing in DC, I had an anonymous blog, and much of the motivation at that time was from feeling extremely stifled in my views and needing an outlet, needing to express what I knew would get me in trouble, what I could, especially in DC, maybe more so than anywhere else. And I wanted to write because it was therapeutic anyway, and I liked the structure of it, and I liked having something to do and the craft and trying to improve. But yeah, I also needed that valve for blowing off some steam and saying things that I could at the same time wouldn't stick to my name and that I wouldn't have to answer for and I wouldn't have to explain. With that being said, as I have gone on, as I've developed as a writer and an artist, I don't think I am quite as motivated by a need to let out these forbidden opinions so much. It doesn't feel it doesn't feel quite like the same impulse. I am probably a little bit more even-keeled about that, and what I'm more motivated by now is writing, expressing thoughts, feelings, capturing, rendering experiences that most, if not all, people have, even if they've never articulated them. So it becomes a far less politically polar pursuit for me. But still somewhat related, if there is this need still for an outlet, then it's not so much political, but it's still, there are things in polite company that you can't readily, comfortably, non-awkwardly express. It's too dark, it's too deep, it's too heavy. But these are still things that at least I assume or intuit that other people have also felt and experienced, but you just don't, on an everyday level, you're not going to be sharing these things. But that's what literature for me allows for.
Well, I think you did that's very well put. And it allows your book to be read without problem, I think, by anyone from on the political spectrum. And as I said to you, or we were discussing in the preamble before we started recording, I think it's important that at least some of us writers on this side of the political spectrum are writing very accessible books. There's no point in us writing basically political pamphlets that no one's ever going to read because they, other than the hardcore,
right,
and art deserve a certain respect, hands-off respect when it comes to the politics and other issues. So full marks to you for pulling it off, because you did pull it off extremely well. Were there any other writers that influenced you? I've seen references to McCarthy in some of your reviews. I haven't read McCarthy. I'm sure whatever he wrote, and I know roughly where he comes from. First of all, I'd like to wonder if he's one of the writers influenced you, if not others. But I know that his books are famous for their hard-hitting emotional impact, and that certainly comes across in your book. So go on, was he one of the influences, or were there others?
He was a major influence and continues to be a big influence, although I think of myself as having a fairly complicated relationship with influences. I'm not a big favorite guy. I don't really gush over particular authors. I don't fixate, and I'm almost never completely uncritical. It's in my nature, I think, to still maintain some distance from whoever even is influencing me. So in the case of McCarthy, there are a couple of books of his that I enjoy very much and I know have been extremely influential and have exerted this force on me. But he has some other books which are more popular or seem to be referenced more often that I do not like nearly as much and see as pretty flawed, and I don't take as much from them. So there's no one person that I consider to be godly or so far above everyone else that no one could ever reach him. I have, maybe somewhat cantankerously, I have problems with just about everyone, but I can still appreciate something in a wide range of authors as well. So Cormac McCarthy is a big figure for me, and what I take from him is his the rolling, turbulent, atmospheric, gothic quality of the prose. And I think he is considered at this point, because of the shift about midway through his career, he is considered almost more of a writer of these extremely graphically violent westerns. But in the first part of his career, he was writing in a more Appalachian or Southern setting. So it was more of an Appalachian or Southern Gothic. And then he became known as more of a writer of these extremely twisted westerns, like a Demented McMurtry or something. And I am much more fond of his early career when he was writing of Appalachian settings, partially because it's closer to home for me, and also because I think he was actually more disciplined then. I think he was a better writer. I think he wrote a little bit leaner and just had more control. It's a judgment call, maybe I'm off base on this, but his later work, I think some of those metaphors and similes, they just sound ridiculous to me.
Where does The Road fall in? Because that's the one book I'm sort of familiar with, mainly because of the film.
The Road is much later. It's one of the. That might even be it's either that or No Country for Old Men, I think. See, I'm not even sure on the timeline there because it's a little late. he wrote a book called Blood Meridian, which is considered to be his masterpiece. And Harold Bloom has called it one of the greatest novels of the 20th century, or something like that. And yeah, to me, it's the praise is way overblown, and that's the turning point, I think.
I mentioned the road because in my brain, when I was reading your novel, there were parallels. But the funny thing is, his is post-apocalyptic, and yours is apocalyptic. And
pre-apocalyptic.
Yeah, and that's amazing. You know, the fact is, you're describing scenes in everyday America now.
Right.
Almost as horrifying as what he's describing in post. You know,
Sure.
The meltdown of societies, which I think highlights the cleverness of what you were doing, in a sense. Here we are living, really,
yeah,
the equivalent of a post-apocalyptic world without the apocalypse having happened yet.
Sure. No, that was also intentional, and it was almost done to counter the prevalence or the overabundance of post-apocalyptic scenarios in movies, in books. It's such a ready-made theme at this point that I wanted to take things back to what is more roughly contemporary. It's already here. There's no event that defines it. There's no bomb that has to go off. There's no nuclear holocaust. You know, there's no genocide required. It's just this gradual
erosion
process. Yes.
It's so true. Brilliantly put. I mean, yes, apocalypse today comes in a little pill box prescribed to you by the doctor you trust.
It comes in bags of chips. It comes in convenience stores. It comes in the fact that you can be broke but still go to a gas station and fill up on food that will make you feel absolutely wretched, yet sustain you in a certain sense.
Well, we're getting closer and closer to the actual book. It's called The Neighbor. I haven't mentioned that yet. Sorry.
Sorry.
This is, I think, the blurb in it. It's quite short and gives you a good idea of what's going on. It's set in Middle America, you have to remember, modern day, and the protagonist is Jesse Clemens. Jesse Clemens is out of cash and on the run from his job, from his neighbors, the cops, and his life. The Neighbor is a middle American odyssey in which truck stops and farmhouses stand in for the Aegean Islands, and the neon signs of convenience stores are the sirens of dissipation. Told in a unique double narrative form with sardonic humor and grim realism, Caleb Caudell, is it Caudell or Caudell?
It's Caudell, yeah.
His debut novel is an unflinching look at the desolation and the consolations of the hidden people of the heartland. Basically, without giving too much away, Jesse that's spelled it out very much, and not really setting out to cause trouble, but he ends up causing trouble, and the next thing you know, he's running for his life. And it is his journey through on the run, basically, with interspersed with not really flashbacks, but sort of background story.
Yes.
How he got there and what his daily life is like. And can you tell us about Jesse? What was your inspiration for him, and where he comes from?
Yeah, Jesse Clemens is a true lower class or bottomed out working class everyman. He is intentionally somewhat void of qualities. There are qualities that come through that are shown, but I try not to do a lot of telling. I try not to do too much of what I would almost call a Dickensian description of appearance and mannerisms and tics, not getting into a lot of exposition. I almost want him to be read as this blur or composite of several characters that if you've lived in these areas or if you've encountered these environments, you know what I'm talking about, and you've seen this type of person. He comes from working class parents and never, for whatever reason, never really had ambition to rise above his station. never wanted to be in school, never wanted to get a degree, never saw himself as the kind of person who could do any of those things. He took the jobs that were available to him, and the jobs that were available were always kitchen jobs. They were service jobs. They were bottom rung shift work jobs. And though he never demanded much of himself and always took things as they came to him, the most form I give him is that he has a little bit, at least, of a romantic streak. And of course, that gets stepped on and stamped out, but that may be more so than some sort of career ambition or creative aspiration. I think that's the primary positive quality or facet of his life that I wanted to bring out, where everything else is very much just a product of this desperate environment in which he's been brought up.
And in which vast numbers of now America are being brought up all the time. It's like a machine chugging out these. You can't really call them losers, but you can't really call them successes either. That's just who we're. The vast majority of the population, it seems to be turning out like.
That's right, and it is at least in part an effect of deindustrialization. But when you say, "Oh, we're dealing now with the fallout of deindustrialization," you have to include part of what that means is also the rapidity of industrialization itself as well. So it's not just the fact that, well, there are no jobs now, or there aren't high-paying jobs for average intellects or people of average abilities now. It's that for a brief period, there was this explosion of those opportunities and this rapid increase in material prosperity and opportunity, and then an equally rapid, if not perhaps maybe even more drastic, decline in those opportunities.
Which has left this huge void, which is yet to be filled with anything that makes any sense whatsoever.
That's right, and that's because the generation or two that enjoyed that prosperity didn't have time to establish traditions of prosperity or habits of success. When you remove those material means so quickly, when they were that precarious, when it was all dependent on this insane production factory schedule, and that goes away, you were talking about serious devastation at that point.
Yeah, which comes across very strongly. You have a brilliant eye for description. I can't recommend the book enough in that sense, and I could spend the next 20 minutes reading excerpts. I picked out just a few at random, but they're all sort of given the audience an idea. He rings a doorbell, and the ringing chimes sounded like a sad child tinkering on a xylophone, which I thought was brilliant. Chirping crickets sounded like fiddling demons. And then you describe little birds. Robins and sparrows chirped from their perches and nests. They walked with their wings behind them, looking like diplomats discussing trade agreements while out for a stroll in the garden of an embassy. And the book is full of these little metaphors and similes, and very skillfully done throughout.
Thank you.
Well, alienation, which is obviously a major theme, I think I've selected a little passage which I think deserves a wider audience. I think I've abridged it slightly, but it goes, every town and city had the same places and the same features and had undergone the same stratification. The world had been made to resemble itself in all locations, to present the same varied face everywhere. Even disorientation was losing its sense because there was less and less orientation in the first place. Brilliant. Clemens walked on streets and across parking lots in hanging heat, and he sweated without wiping himself off. He walked by the same businesses he saw everywhere, the long chain retail stores and restaurants laying like shackles across the land, enslaving everyone to the same commercial rhythms, tastes and experiences, and the same cops cruising dismal streets without giving a damn. I don't know if that's McCarthy-esque, but it sounds like it is to me.
Yeah, that is striking me in this moment as, yeah, that was probably a more McCarthy-inspired moment.
Lastly, of the excerpts, and as I say, there could have been hundreds. On a policeman, the door opened and a squat officer stepped into the store. He wore a black uniform and black sunglasses. For all anyone knew, he had no eyes, only fathomless holes. He stood just inside the door and looked over the room, his fat hands on his hips, his thick head moving like a turret on a gunship. And you also do, I think several times, address the issue of the food we eat, the TV we watch, on the same theme. It's all very, fits very smoothly into the same theme of desolation, disorientation, and really tragedy that seems, and it's not just America. I'm afraid I come from England. It's an epidemic there. Forget the epidemic they're talking about. We've got real epidemics happening. It's across the West, and I think even into Eastern Russia, into the Eastern countries.
Right.
All of these places are. Japan has its own problems.
Yes, it does.
It's the more success, the bigger you are, the harder you fall. It seems to be.
Yes, there is a victimization that occurs through that success, through that prosperity. Absolutely.
Hang on a second. So, where does the book ends on a kind of it leaves the possibility of a second book open. Our hero, in inverted commas, is he's going to rebuild his life. That's a pretty clear signal. Do you see him reappearing again, or is his day in the sun, his 15 minutes of fame over?
Well, I suppose I can't speak with 100% certainty on that, but I am inclined to say that his story is over, even though it ends on an ambiguous note. I wanted it to end that way, and I wanted it to end because also I think I'm somewhat in opposition to this proliferation of expanded universes and these epic worlds and all the world building and the side plots and the side characters and the spin-offs and all the offshoots. I would rather present narrowed universes, contracted universes, where backgrounds are unclear, where that's right, side plots are cut off. There's no, you have to move on. You have to go to a different story, to a different world, a different set of characters. And that's even how I treated other characters within the book. I didn't want to belabor, even though, yes, I wanted certain images to be very graphic and vivid, I didn't want to belabor detail on characters, motivations, backgrounds, where they were coming from, where they were going. I thought, at least what I wanted to do was present something that is truer to life, and that, especially maybe from my perspective, as somebody who's worked in service for so long, where you're getting brief impressions for the most part. You're not getting exhaustive information on every little thing that a person has gone through and wants to do and will go through. It's all these lines that pass by and then they disappear. And of course, there are many questions you could raise about how exactly did Jesse end up. You get some background, but you can still ask questions. There are still gaps, and that's on purpose, and that will never be filled in. And I don't know, maybe I'll live long enough to want to revisit it, but for the most part, I'm thinking that that's the story, and the next thing I do will be completely unrelated.
What about the next thing you're going to do then? What are your thoughts on it? So I don't know if you're underway already or just contemplating.
It's been, I will say now, it's been an interesting experience having finished a book, because for about a year and a half, every day I was focused on writing this book, and my sense of identity as a writer hinged on that experience of, I wrote today, I wrote more today, I'm working towards completing this novel.
Right.
Then the funny thing is that when I finished, I actually felt less like a writer, because now I don't have an immediate project. Sure, there's a product that is finished, but it left me feeling a little bit lost. And
Well, there isn't, for a while, there isn't even a product, is there? I mean, you've got a pile of paper on your desk, but it takes a while to. We'll come on to your publishing process in a minute, but for a while you're left with the sense of a complete vacuum in your life.
That's right. And then even when it does become a product, there's still this major lag in reception. It's not as I'm not posting videos to YouTube. I'm not even doing something like a podcast where I do it and then it's out. Or even a blog post where, you know, maybe I'll take a few days to really bear down on a topic and then I post it, and then you get likes, you get comments, you get your hearts fill up on Twitter. But with a book, it's something more nebulous. It's out there floating. Anybody could order it. You don't really know. It takes time for people to read it.
Sure.
And when you put that much into something like that, there is, I do think, a note of a little bit of insecurity crept in there. I wasn't as prepared as I thought I would be for that hanging, floating, uncertain sense that I have this serious work, this reflection of my intelligence and experience out there that now people can pass judgment on, but I don't have quite the same feedback system in place. It's not as immediate. I don't have as much control over it. A blog post I can always just edit. If I realize there's something I don't like about it, I can go change it. I can erase it. I can take it down.
Sure.
But this now is out there and it's out of my hands. But I have to. So that the book actually came out. I think it's been about a month now, and I haven't completely stopped writing. I haven't. Maybe the smart thing to do would have been giving myself a true break, like just not writing anything for a little while. But what I did instead was, instead of writing every day, I would take 2 or 3 days to relax a little bit. But then I would work on a blog post. I've still put stuff up on my website. I've still done nonfiction. I've worked on short stories. I have thought that my next project is a short story collection, because I have quite a few short stories. I have several that I have put up on my site, and I have several more that I have been working on that I haven't put out yet, that are in varying stages of editing and drafting. But I'm a little unsure about that right now, because I have been going back over some of those, and many of them are from the beginning stages of when I was trying out fiction, and I feel pretty distant from them, and I don't like them so much. And maybe they're salvageable, but that's what I'm weighing right now. Apart from that, I actually do have about 15-ish thousand words of the next novel I want to write. And I think I'm more excited about writing novels, really, than short stories. Even though I started doing that, there's something about the short story now that's becoming more difficult for me. I don't know. I think I want that bigger canvas at this point. I think I'm almost more comfortable with that now. And for this second novel, it's going to be a little bit more ambitious in scope and in character, because there are going to be many more characters, much more richly developed. But it's a Midwestern story. It is my version of a gangster or mafia story set in the Midwest. And it's set vaguely in post-war Indiana. So like late 40s, early 50s, maybe mid 50s, sometime around then. And it's going to involve this group of gangsters who operate between, I don't know if I'll actually use these locations. I think I will base the locations on Indianapolis and Chicago. And I'm also purposefully making them Anglo-Saxon and Germanic as a counterweight to crime or gangster movies that tend to feature Italian Americans, Jewish Americans, other ethnic blocks, but I wanted to, even though I don't even know how, I need to do some more research. I don't know how historically exact it's supposed to be. It's a little bit of a fantasy thing, but I wanted to do something a little bit different. But I want to write something that's pretty gritty, pretty violent, with a lot of characterization and a more intricate plot. It's a revenge story. I'm pretty heavily influenced also by crime novels and movies. Like I really like all the classics, like Godfather and uh, Michael Mann movies, Miami Vice, Heat, Collateral, things like that. So I want to do, if it's at all possible, if it doesn't sound completely ridiculous, I want to do a noirish crime drama set in the Midwest.
Sounds almost Coen Brothers. I'm not very familiar with their work, but Miller's Crossing or something like that might.
Yes, yeah, that's actually a good reference. Probably closer to something like that.
That's quite a different genre to what you've written. It'd be fascinating to see how you tackle that.
Yeah, it will not be as, I don't know. There are probably still going to be some moments of dry humor, or probably not as much absurdist humor, or even what almost borders on slapstick at times, like low humor. It's probably going to be a little bit more elevated in a certain sense. I don't want it to be. I still don't want it to be stuffy or starchy or anything like that. But it is probably not going to, just because of the setting, it's not going to involve trash food and desperate bathroom emergencies.
Please no more.
Yeah.
They were very vividly described, your partners.
Yeah, it will have a different feel from that.
Fast food, see, if anyone wants to put their children off fast food for life, just read out some sections on that in your novel.
The cautionary tale, yeah.
Now, you, unlike most of my guests, got published. You found a publisher who looks like a very interesting entity in Australia called Bonfire Books, and it's hard to tell from their blurb, but it does seem like they're quite open-minded. They're looking to print stuff that's probably being overlooked, or almost certainly being overlooked by others for stupid, politically correct reasons and so on. Give us a little bit, because there'll be other people who have been watching this who've written and are looking for publishers. Could you give us a little bit of an idea how you came across them, who they are, and so on?
Sure, yeah. Bonfire Books is a newer publishing company, and they have a couple of titles at this point, and I am their, I believe, first living author that they've worked with. So far, up until they published my book, they were publishing obscure books by dead authors, and they are youngish, probably about my age, around the same age. One of them lives in Australia. Maybe they both live in Australia. I don't know that I was entirely clear on that altogether. I know one of them at least lives in Australia. And what struck me about them, really, this may sound like faint praise, but they are very normal. They don't hit you as, oh yes, these guys are fringe, they're extreme, they're radical one way or the other, or even in the world of, let's call it indie or alternative literature. I don't know. With all due respect, I have some internet friends, I think, that move in these circles, but a lot of it, to me, it almost strikes me as performatively decadent or depraved, not in the writing, but in the personas that are projected. There's a lot of like oblique reference to drug abuse and not that I don't want to make light of problems that people have, but all this is to say that they just seem like normal guys,
Right.
and they just have an interest in putting out books. And I don't think they're gunning hard for any one message, any one political platform. anyone's style, but they do seem genuinely open-minded and willing to work, because
that's incredibly rare in the publishing industry today, and it has been for about 20 years, in my opinion. But
right, I thought it was extremely refreshing, and at some point, it was back in, I think it was last fall, I was getting close to finishing the book. I ended up doing quite a bit more revisions, but I thought I was getting close to having it done. And I made a Twitter post, I think, about publishing the book, and I asked if anyone knew of anyone who would want to work with me, or if anyone directly wanted to work with me, and they got a hold of me directly. And they had been reading my blog. So that, every now and then I have this moment where I think, is it worth it to write these blog posts? Because I don't really do stuff that's that topical. I don't pull from the news that heavily. I make reference sometimes, but I don't write in that blog style of, here's an article that this other corrupt outlet wrote, and here's what I think about it. And then people comment on that, and then there's comments on comments on comments. I don't really do that style, so it's not that topical. But it's still, even so, when you write on a blog, it can feel a little ephemeral. It can feel a little bit insubstantial.
And it is, but you've shown that it has a purpose and can be useful.
Yeah, and from however they found me and that site, they liked what I was doing, and they were interested in the novel, and we started talking and went back and forth, and we made it happen.
Great. And it came out a month ago. The novel's called The Neighbor, for anyone. Well, I'll put links afterwards. I'll put a link to your blog as well. The blog is a very interesting one. It's not your run-of-the-mill one, I have to say. If you've got time, it's a lovely way to spend some time just exploring and picking up your...
Yes, it is. It's really, probably embarrassingly personal, yet I maybe lack that shame or embarrassment in putting out many personal details, but not in a raw diary style. It's still rendered, it's still crafted, it's still cultivated, but it's pulling material from my real day-to-day life, and I try not to pull any punches.
No, that's also true of the novel. And thank goodness, and we need more. But I bet if you went through the New York Times top 100 fiction, it's all people pulling punches or
yes,
or coming down to a certain type of ideology. Or
it's the MFA PAP. It's
what does MFA stand for? Someone put it in one of your reviews, and I guess it's the people who've gone to a university and learned how to been brainwashed into a certain type of writing.
Yes, style. Officially, MFA stands for Master of Fine Arts, and it is the programs vary by university, but roughly it's a 2-year program. It's a master's program that you enroll in after you've completed a 4-year degree, where you are you're instructed in the ways of proper 21st century globalist fiction writing.
So in other words, all your original and thought-provoking ideas have to get sucked out of your brain and filled with this mush that everyone can swallow without. A bit like the fast food that you said.
Right, yes. It has, there's an assembly line quality to it, yeah.
On the plus side, it does leave the field open for people like us to punch big holes in their grand plan and to get an audience, attract an audience too, because that's really the demand is out there. So now we have to just provide quality material like you have done and get it out to the public somehow.
That's right.
Very well. Well, Caleb, I congratulate you. It's a very accomplished piece of work, and
thank you. I appreciate that.
By any standard, I was very impressed with your quality of writing, and I recommend it to everyone. So well done. Let's see what you come up with next. If it sounds
Yes. No, I'm very excited. I've already got a start to it, and I am ready to move forward with it.
great. Well, thank you very much again. All the best.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.